And those who contemplate destroying Israel, they contemplate destroying, not only physically destroying the people of Israel here, but also their culture. Without Israel, there won't be this flourishing culture. And that's what we call, by name, genocide. Because the core of anti-Semitism is animosity not, first of all, not against individual Jews, but against Jewishness or against Jewish collectivity.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of The Western Spirit. And today, we're going to talk about a topic that's on everyone's mind who follows my show, which is anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism. What is the difference between them? What are the similarities? Are they the same? And to do that, we're going to talk with Professor Efraim Podoksik. Professor Podoksik is a political science professor at the Political Science Department at the Hebrew University here in Jerusalem. And he's someone who extensively studies this topic, and we know each other for a long time. We've been talking about this, and I read his stuff regularly. So, Professor Podoksik, it's a pleasure having you here.
Thank you, Ariel. Thank you for inviting me. And it's indeed a very important topic and becoming more important in the recent months. And there is a very interesting debate going within the Jewish community, also pro-Israel community, of whether there is a connection between anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism, and if there is, what kind of connection it is. And I think we can describe two camps and two sides in this debate. There are those who wish to claim that anti-Semitism is just anti-Zionism is just a form of anti-Semitism. Mm-hmm. Anti-Semitism we just understand broadly as animosity towards Jews, as anti-Zionism is a form of anti-Semitism. But there is also another side of the debate, and there is a person called Adam Louis Klein, who advanced the view that anti-Zionism is a hatred of its own. We shouldn't conflate it with traditional anti-Semitism. There is anti-Semitism, which is bad, and there is also anti-Zionism, which is bad. And I believe that both sides in this debate are right and wrong at the same time, because they don't differentiate between two different levels of debate, or two different questions. And I think these two levels can be described as, on the one hand, a moral question, and on the other hand, I would say pragmatic or predictive question. So I will start with the moral side. So if we talk about the morality of these kind of hatreds, it's absolutely unimportant whether anti-Zionism is the same as anti-Semitism.
Yes. Because
any kind of hatred of this scale is morally repugnant. Imagine that here in the land of Israel, the population, the majority population, would not be Jews, but Yazidis or Armenians. Right. And for example, it would be the only Armenian state in the world with American language and American culture. Would we say that to be against the Armenian state of Israel will be any less repugnant just because the Armenians are not Jews? Of course not. Because the problem with this, it's not important how is there a connection, what kind of connection exists between Israel or Israeli Jews and the Jews abroad. But the fact is that the Jews here in Israel developed a unique culture, special culture, based on the Hebrew language. And those who contemplate destroying Israel, they contemplate destroying, not only physically destroying the people of Israel here, but also their culture. Without Israel, there won't be this flourishing culture. And that's what we call, by name, genocide. And why do we think that genocide is the most atrocious crime of all crimes? Because it destroys not only the persons themselves, it doesn't only kill physically, but it destroys the whole cultural universe among them. That's why we consider this as most repugnant. And even if anti-Zionism and anti-Israelism is not anti-Semitism, it has nothing to do with Jews, it's morally not less deserves of contempt and condemnation than anti-Semitism.
So that's on the moral side, but on the practical, you said...
On the practical side, nevertheless, I think the investigation of whether there is a connection between anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism is important because we not every sort of hatred we treat it equally.
Right.
For example, I assume that some Brits jokingly dislike French. And other way around. So for Brits, French eat frogs. So that's. Oh, of course, there is animosity between Oxford and Cambridge, right?
Yes.
But we usually don't denounce these kind of. Maybe it's not right. Maybe it's morally problematic. But we don't denounce them so strongly as we denounce anti-Semitism and similar kinds of hatred. Why? Because we also estimate the probability of violence.
Yes.
Of probability of an extent of crime to which a certain hatred leads. And we know that some kinds of hatred tend to be more violent than others. And therefore, when we make our order of priority against which hatred we fight, therefore we choose. And we know that in history, anti-Semitism, that is, the animosity towards Jews, often tend to turn to be very deadly.
Yes.
Why is it so? We can speak about this later.
Right.
But we know this as a fact.
Yes.
So whenever there was a persecution of Jews, it turned out to be not some moderate discrimination, but very, very ferocious atrocities that were committed in the name of the hatred against Jews. And therefore, if we establish that there is some connection, that anti-Zionism is indeed a form of anti-Semitism, therefore we also make prediction that this is one of the most dangerous and violent forms of hatred. The people who profess anti-Zionism are potential killers, and therefore we should really examine if there is such connection or not.
Right. So that basically what you're saying is that if there is if on the conceptual level there is a connection between anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism, it would mean that those anti-Zionists have the potential of being very violent.
Yes.
And that's why we should treat it with the more serious type of hate.
Yes.
But can I ask you something that just pops into my head, that in America, at least where I follow stuff, and I assume in Europe it's true too, that it's very unfashionable, at least it was, among intellectual circles, which you know a lot about, to say we hate Jews. It is, on the other hand, very fashionable to say we hate Zionists. We see that all over the place. I'm not anti-Semitic. I'm an anti-Zionist. I love Jews. I just hate the Zionists. How do you, so in a way, there's a permission structure in the way our language is set up now where it's unfashionable. I'm not, among the right-wing anti-Semites, it's very fashionable to hate Jews. I mean, you can talk about, I guess, the difference between the types of Jew hatred that we see and where they come from. But among the more intellectual leftist types, you have this sort of dichotomy where everyone knows among these circles that it's not. You don't in polite society say, like, I hate all those Jews. They control the banks, they control the media. So that's already out. But we all know that at least in these circles, a lot of it is the Jews. But we're not allowed to say it, so we'll say we hate the Zionists. So how do you differentiate, even if you come to the conclusion that anti-Zionism isn't anti-Semitism, and I don't know, we'll see what you say about that. But if someone takes that position, how does he differentiate when it is really anti-Zionism and when it is just a pretext for hating the Jews?
Well, I actually don't care against. When I meet such a person, first of all, I judge him morally. To be against Israel in such terms, not to criticize a certain aspect of Israeli policy.
Which we all do here.
Means to be a bad person. Right. So I don't care with anti-Semitism. If he wants to eliminate me and eliminate my world, eliminate my language, which I speak, which is Hebrew, he's a criminal in my view. Why should I care whether he's anti-Semite or not? He wants to destroy me. He wants to kill me. Or he wants others to kill me. So why should I care if he is anti-Semite or not? So like as a scholar, I should care with anti-Semite, then I can predict if his fantasy of killing me actually materializes.
So what do you think? Do you think these people that say they're anti-Zionists, not anti-Semites, they really they're the same level of hate, the same danger of hate?
Okay, so let's first, in order to understand that, we should actually understand what anti-Semitism is. And I don't mean anti-Semitism as it was thought in the end of 19th century by some German anti-Semites who invented the word, but just as something that signifies animosity towards Jews. And there is a certain stereotype, it's part of the legacy of the Holocaust, which thinks that anti-Semites hate individual Jews, hate Jews as individuals.
Right.
And it was certainly true about Nazis. But it was not true about anti-Semitism in general, because there is a familiar saying that every Jew, every anti-Semite has a Jewish friend.
Yes. Just like the black racists against African
Yeah,
Americans.
sure. But if anti-Semitism were hatred about each single Jew, this phrase wouldn't make sense. Nazis, well, some Nazis perhaps had some Jewish friends, but for Nazis it would be unacceptable to have a Jewish friend. But many anti-Semites in history had Jewish friends. And why is that? Because the core of anti-Semitism is animosity not, first of all, not against individual Jews, but against Jewishness or against Jewish collectivity, and to individual Jews to the extent that they represent for them this Jewish collectivity. So imagine, for example, a village somewhere in Ireland, and there is a 90 years old Jewish lady living there who is not distinguished from any other ladies in that village, and there is some anti-Semitic neighbor who is anti-Semite. He hates Jewishness, but he's very nice to this lady because for him she doesn't represent any threat of Jewishness. He doesn't think that she has any Jewish traits. He thinks that she's completely assimilated. So it's absolutely compatible for anti-Semite also to be nice to some particular Jews, but to be against Jewishness. And the question is then, what is Jewishness? And because Jews are people with long history, the characteristics of Jewishness evolved throughout the time. Right. Once it was kind of combination of political independence and certain religious cult. Then it became mainly a religious community. And toward the modernity, Jews began to be recognized more and more as an ethnic or national group. And depending on what kind of Jewishness is prominent at that particular moment, these people, anti-Semites, wanted to reject it or to deny legitimacy to this kind of collectivity. So Christian anti-Semites, that is Christianity, denied legitimacy to the Jewish religion. Of course, it would like all Jews to become Christians. Right. Similarly, when Jewishness came to be identified with a kind of ethnicity, like for someone like 19th century historian Heinrich von Treitschke, they would say about Jews who must be stripped of all kinds of Jewish ethnic mentality and culture. And the idea of anti-Semitism, and this it's different from many other forms of animosity. It's not that it's only hostile to a different group, but for somehow it denies legitimacy to this group. So French may dislike Brits and Brits may dislike French, but there is no movement that says being Brit is an affront to humanity. Being French is an affront to humanity. I just dislike French because I'm Brit, and I dislike some of their habits.
But can I just one thing that's interesting about today's hate that I see, that I see at least online, is that every person who hates Jews looks at Jews in a different way, and that's why he hates the Jews. Like, you can have two anti-Semites or people, I would say Judophobia maybe is a good way to make, would you, like they're not anti all Jews, they're anti the Jewishness, which is the way you described it. But the way they look at Jewishness is different from one to another, right?
I think it's just a matter of personal language. I don't think there are many differences among them, because and then they coalesce to the hatred of the prominent aspect of Jewishness.
What's the prominent?
Let's move gradually to this question.
Sorry.
Okay. So, but the question remains: why against Jews? If you take, for example, the Book of Esther.
Yeah. From the Purim.
From Purim.
Yeah.
What does a man says to Ahasuerus? He says, "Well, there is a people who has special laws and special rituals, and why would that be a problem in a multinational Persian empire? This would be a problem because while for other ethnic groups it would be absolutely okay to live under their own rules and under their own laws, somehow Jews are qualitatively different from anti-Semites. And therefore they are not prepared to give them the same rights as they give to all other groups. And I will bring you the example of a thinker who expresses precisely this thought. It's Hegel.
Yeah.
And when he was a young person, he was very hostile to Jews. Later, he moderated his hostility and somewhat modified his views. But in one of his early works, he discusses precisely this question. And then what he says, he basically expresses this usually subconscious anti-Semitic prejudice. Mm-hmm. And he says about Jews, about early Jews, Hebrews, the following. He says, the state of independence linked to universal hostility could not persist. It is too opposed to nature. In other peoples, the state of independence is a state of good fortune, of humanity at a more beautiful level. So it's okay for all other peoples in the world to have independence. With the Jews, the state of independence was to be a state of total passivity, of total ugliness, because their dependence secured to them only food and drink, an indigent existence. It followed that with this independence, with this little, all was lost or jeopardized. So it's not. It's not a Judaism Christianity polemics, because Hegel speaks about the times before Christianity, and he compares Jews just with other people. With other peoples. And he says, well, all other peoples are legitimate, and their striving for independence is also legitimate. It's not legitimate for Jews to strive for independence, because they turn out to be ugly.
Ugly.
So just,
is it aesthetic-wise ugly, you think, or also
morally ugly? Morally ugly, because he think that Jews actually put themselves vis-a-vis humanity. They have a kind of hostility to the world and to humanity. And for the record, let's say that what Hegel says is bullshit, like what often many good philosophers and intellectuals say is bullshit. So just don't believe a word of it. But we should actually really not to understand what is behind this kind of anti-Semitism. And now, the question is where there is most robust Jewishness, a Jewish culture today.
Here.
In the independent state which protects this Jewishness and its embodiment of Jewishness. So the most Jewish life can be lived in Israel, because people here naturally speak a Jewish language, naturally breathe a Jewish culture. And because today the epicenter of Jewishness is the Jewish state, of course, most anti-Semites will first want to demolish it. Not because it's state, but because it is Jewish. Because they recognize that in the conditions of modernity, without the Jewish culture protected by the Jewish state, there won't be, maybe in the end, there won't be Jews. Mm-hmm. So therefore, they say, okay, we will take care of this Irish Jewish lady 90 years old later. Now we will concentrate, as good generals, we will concentrate at what is important. And hence the double standards towards Israel. These double standards for them are not double standards. It's just this kind of Hegelian position that all other countries have their right for independence, and Israel's right is suspect, at least, or illegitimate. And here we can distinguish between moderate, enlightened anti-Semites and like radical anti-Semites. Enlightened anti-Semites say, okay, Jews as individuals suffered a lot. Maybe we should give them a kind of state. But they always should remember that they're not really a state, because their collectivity is a front to humanity. We don't recognize, we are offended when Jews demand the equal rights for themselves. And I want to give you an example of one such enlightened anti-Semite. And I think that we can safely claim that Emmanuel Macron, the
Yes.
president of France, fits this characteristic.
What did he say?
Just a second. Not every anti-Israeli politician displayed any kind of anti-Semitism. Maybe it's just a bad person, right? But Macron said something. But first, he also leaked that his anti-Israeli politics is somehow recommended by his Jewish Israeli advisors.
Why am I not surprised?
So it's always a very good sign. If someone is not anti-Semitic, he doesn't need these Jewish friends. He doesn't need these Israeli friends. Only anti-Semites need Jewish friends.
Yes.
And there was another leak, which was kind of denied, but not denied. I think it's what happened. So in 2024, when Macron turned against Israel, and I read from news, it's October 24, in clash with Netanyahu, Macron says Israel Prime Minister must not forget his country created by UN decision. So, Jewish existence is conditioned on their good behavior. Mm-hmm. What does it mean? Imagine a house, a shelter for young delinquents or people,
Homeless.
young people, who run from home and they're taken to the home. And this house is very nice. They lead their regular lives, but it has rules. You can't. You should return home by 8 p.m. If you return after 8 p.m., you are punished. If all of you disregard these rules, we will close this house. Of course, no one controls any other inhabitant of that town, and he can return whenever he wants, and even can have the right to not to be a good person. Only these delinquents are not allowed to be bad or behave somehow that which is against the rules. That's the attitude to Israel. Your existence is not the existence of sovereignty. Your existence is conditional. And of course, Macron doesn't want genocide of Jews. He doesn't want Jews to be killed. But he culturally, subconsciously displays this kind of anti-Semitic attitude. That's why I refer to Macron as an anti-Semite.
Can I point out something that makes total sense with what you're saying? So one of the things that people asked me a lot, and I assume they also asked you, is that in the wake of October 7th, the entire world came to Israel. All the leaders, including Macron and Biden and all of the European leaders. And within a few weeks, they basically turned their backs on Israel, or at least rhetorically were they weren't as warm, let's put it this way, and over time, less and less. And some of them, like Macron, became very anti-Israel, or at least anti-Israel. And so people said, like, what happened? What changed where they came when the Jews were being massacred? But once the Jews did, it wasn't in the beginning, Israel didn't start like carpet bombing Gaza. It took time, for the build up. We didn't go into Gaza for 3 weeks.
And they never carpet bomb
right.
Gaza.
I'm saying,
it's very important.
Obviously. What I'm saying is that it wasn't the full scale war yet. And already they were turning their backs on Israel. And the question was why? And I think the reason, and it makes sense with what you're saying, is that when the Jews are being killed and massacred and are weak, and we still haven't responded yet, they're willing to come and show support. But when we have the independence, when we strike back, like you said, when we make decisions for ourselves, where they don't control or where we don't listen to their advice and their instructions, that's when they turn on you. And it sort of goes in connection with what you're saying, that when these types of, I would say, anti-Semites or we'll talk about what it means exactly, but they look at Israel in a sense of like we're a client state of theirs, all of theirs, right? Because we're not allowed to go out of the boundaries that they set for us.
I don't think it is precisely client state.
So how would you call it?
It's just a typical attitude towards Jews.
Uh-huh.
It's not because we are one of theirs, but just weaker. Because then still on the level of humanity, you treat your clients equally.
Right.
They don't think about Jews as equal.
Uh-huh.
And your description, what is going on, is a bit optimistic.
Okay.
Why? Because this suggests that, of course, these people are not prepared to give to the Jews the right to defend themselves, but at least they have enough mercy and have compassion to sympathize with
The dead Jews.
Yeah, with the dead Jews. But the problem is that in the process, moderate anti-Semitism has no other way but to evolve into radical anti-Semitism. So it was one-time sympathy. So people were just not used to witness Jews killed on such an industrial scale in the modern times. But anti-Semites work around the clock to in a later event to have less sympathy and less sympathy for the Jews, and that's actually their propagandist project. Because, and of course I don't say about everyone, but there are some people who are keenly aware about what they're doing, and what they think is that Hitler made one mistake. Although he did eliminate the Jews, but he didn't succeed in convincing the public opinion that he was right. So they want to do the same thing, but with applause of the public community. This will take time, but that's what they're working towards.
So you're saying the logical conclusion of what you're saying is that if another October 7th happened, let's say a year from now, the sympathy that we would receive from the world leaders would be a lot less.
Yeah, of course.
Because they're already number one, they're immunized in a certain way by the large scale because it already happened, and number two, they're also conditioned to the propaganda more. So they'll say, I assume this I'm 100% sure of, even without you saying, that there'll be a sort of double sword condemnation. They'll say, yes, it was very bad that they killed, but we can understand it. And what Israel did in Gaza was so bad that there was no way that they wouldn't do this, because how long can you torture people until they break out? And that was said already on October 7th, but now would be on a much larger scale because of the conditioning that has been going on over the past two and a half years, more or less, right?
Yeah, absolutely. You're absolutely right.
Okay, so basically what you're saying is, in general, number one, besides the practicality that there's really no difference in the way we, look at people who hate Israel but say they actually don't hate Jews, there really isn't a difference in the sense that even in the way you conceptualize it, because they hate Israel because we're Jews.
Yeah, I think not. And what we're talking here about is certain cultural dynamics, which, and therefore some individual people who hate Israel may not be aware in the beginning of all these implications. So an individual anti-Zionism may not be anti-Semite for time being, but it will necessarily became explicitly anti-Semitic. And why is that? Because this is such a strong kind of hatred that he will need to justify to himself why he hates Israel so much. And he will look for sources, for arguments. And the argument that he will find in anti-Semitic literature. And therefore, every further step that he will make will lead him to exterminationist anti-Semitism. Once you step on that anti-Zionist terrain, there is no way back. And therefore, I treat anti-Zionists as morally repugnant persons, because I know, like in Minority Report, I know what crime in the end they will commit.
Okay, so I want to ask you a few questions about what this means in terms of practically and understanding what we're up against. So, and I'm going to use America as the example because that's what I know, and I think that, by the way, is the largest diaspora, Jewish diaspora in the world. So it's interesting to see what they're up against, because the repercussions that we're seeing is from leaders in the world that are also, a lot of them they don't really care. I think a lot of them just responding politically to the anti-Semitism / anti-Zionism in their own countries. But Jews in America are feeling it, like sometimes even physically, like you said, and it probably will get worse with the years because the genie's out of the bottle, so to speak. Yeah. So when I grew up in America, I grew up in New York, when we spoke about anti-Semitism, we always thought about sort of these neo-Nazis in some, southern town in Idaho. There were a few villages of Nazis, and they made documentaries of them. They were sort of an exotic breed. Like you look at the documentaries of crazy communities. No one thought, I don't remember anyone thinking that it would be like it is now. The people in New York would be walking around in
You haven't
NYU.
seen anything yet.
Exactly. No, but maybe you can explain. So I have friends that study in Columbia University, and they were in shock, even though Columbia has a history of not liking Jews too much, but they were in shock that suddenly they were being stopped in the way to class, that professors were locked out of their offices on university campuses for being, I guess, Jews and pro-Israel Jews, which is like the worst. What happened? How did people that consider themselves, enlightened, liberal, they call themselves that to this day, but they're willing to put on things that are explicitly anti-Jewish, or at least they know that parts of the coalition that is with them in the streets, that is on the encampments, are not just anti-Zionist, but explicitly, looking out for the Jews. I remember in Huntington College, I think it was right after, they literally locked the Jews in the library, and they had to hide the Jews in the attic so that the mob didn't come to but catch the Jews. It almost was reminiscent of, hiding the Jews in the attic. That was what we heard about in the 30s. And so how did this happen at the elite level?
Okay, there are several questions
Yes.
grouped in one.
Yes.
And one question doesn't relate necessarily to the Jews, because a general question of how is it that the decent majority goes after extremists, after exterminationists. And we witness these dynamics in many totalitarian countries. Once a small totalitarian-minded minority achieves prominence, it's relatively easy for it, under certain conditions, also to cause otherwise decent people to flow with it. So it's this dynamic that doesn't need to be related exclusively to the Jews. We see it always. The question is, why is it and how is it that this hatred towards Jews is something that this totalitarian minority begin to profess? For decades and centuries, scholars and thinkers try to think what's so special about anti-Semitism. There is not one definitive answer, but I think that hatred towards Jews is a kind of psychosis.
Yes.
Psychosis towards something which is not completely, neither complete aliens or strangers and nor us, but something in the middle. Someone within us who is, there is something undefined, unclear about Jews as they see it. And this is a situation that often brings about a psychotic psychotic process in the soul. And what is also so special about Jews, that Jews are small people. They're usually very weak. So when your hatred intensifies, you are not marked by reality. You don't need to moderate your hatred to be realistic. So you can develop to the hatred to the kind of to enormous proportions. But whatever the reasons are, what we see in the history of Jews, that the Jews often played the role of what the anthropologist René Girard described as a scapegoat.
Yes.
The society needs this kind of organized violence against scapegoat in order to purify itself for its subconscious conflicts and desire for violence. And I think that humanity was happy for several decades after the Second World War. Why? Because it found as its scapegoats people who were really bad. Nazis were for contemporary humanity scapegoats, but they deserved to be
Yes.
scapegoats.
And then
This
the
is why
communists also, no?
we've lived now for several decades in the most humanistic age in human history. But now the memory of Nazis resigns, and then Jews again take their place. Of course, it's morally repugnant, but that's how the social psychopathology functions.
Can I offer another idea that I think I tend to agree with it on a certain level, is that we've, in America, on the college campuses, university campuses, a lot of the big companies, corporations were in the last decade or so with the big DEI push. And I think the basic tenets of that is Black Lives Matter and all these, before that we had the Occupy Wall Street and all of these. Basically, the way they turned the world very dichotomously into the oppressed versus the oppressor, the white heterosexual male is like the worst of the worst. The Jew, by the way, always is like white adjacent, which is worse than the white oppressor. Do you think that has anything to do with what's happening?
I would strongly recommend against making these connections. Why? Because I believe that opinions and views are post-factum rationalization of the feelings.
Right.
And when we repeat their formula, oppressed against oppressors, we give them credence. We assume that on the subconscious level they believe it, but I don't think they believe it.
You don't think they believe it about anything, not just Jews?
No.
So, like, even when they're talking about, let's say,
extreme left-wing extremism is an ideological lie.
Right.
The psychological reason for this is sublimation of the thirst for violence and power. And then because they like the stronger people. These are the same people who like China, who like Iran, who like Russia. Why? Because they're strong and they commit a lot of violence, and they see a lot of violence committed, not by them because they're not capable of it yet, but by others. And therefore, when we discuss with them on the basis of the language they use, we submit themselves to the logic of their language, which is all lie. This language is bullshit. So we should not give them the legitimacy of using this language.
Wait, so do you accept also another that Douglas Murray talks about also is that the same people who are protesting against Israel with the Palestinian flag and nowadays with the Houthi flag, which I don't get in general, but maybe it's because of the violence that they like it, they also hate the West itself.
Of course, indeed.
So they're not just anti-Semites, they're also anti-Westernites.
Yeah, but
Can you explain the connection?
But we shouldn't be like kind of politically partisan, because this anti-Westernism also exists on the right.
Yes, we'll talk. I want to ask you about the right specifically, but let's just, can you, I don't think the right participates in the anti-Israel protests.
Yeah,
that's my point.
But when the disease strikes a certain society, anti-Semitism, anti-Zionism is a disease, then it doesn't differentiate between different kinds of people, like COVID.
Yes.
It didn't choose specifically right-wing people or left-wing people. And so when we make it a partisan issue and want to say, okay, the problem is this everywhere, but the most dangerous are people on the left. And people on the left say, oh, the most dangerous are people on the right.
Yes.
We introduce some kind of complacency against these diaspora Jews who may think, okay, if only we defeat this camp, everything will be fine.
No, I agree with that. I agree. But on the when we saw the giant protests against Israel all over the world in the West, we saw it in Europe, the giant in the Big Ben, the big protest, like 1 million people in Australia. Now that the President Herzog, we're recording this, it was just in Australia, huge protests against the Israeli president. In New York, we saw it all over the place, blocking next to where my father lives, bashing in Jewish stores and protesting outside synagogues, which I guess proves your point that if you were really just anti-Israel, you wouldn't protest in a random synagogue, right? It's basically proving the point that they hate the Jews. But they were also, like I said, burning American flags.
Yeah.
Could you just, and then I will ask you about the right, and I think the right in a way is almost more dangerous because
I think you want to lead our discussion to the direction which will blur the problem, which will minimize the problem. Because, of course, there is a general problem of the war against the West.
Yes.
This war is led by anti-Western countries such as Russia, Iran, China. And we are just one front in this war. But here, I think what is important for us is not to talk now about the general picture. The general picture is important. Let's leave it for diplomats and others. But for Jews, how Jews should see the
Okay,
situation.
so what should Jews
and what
do?
you describe about this demonstration is nothing yet. It's yet nothing.
You think it's going to get worse?
Jews should understand what is coming. And I want, because there is a certain kind of wishful thinking of some Jews, assimilated Jews, or half-assimilated Jews, who want to be Jews, but they're kind of completely assimilated, integrated, that Israel is somehow a problem.
Yeah.
So if we just remove Israel, everything will be fine, and anti-Semitism will disappear. And my prognosis is that if there is no Israel, the opposite will happen, because the anti-Semites today will not do the same mistake that they think Germans did. So Germans eliminated many Jews, but some Jews, maybe not the most not with the culture core, but some Jews remained, and then they revived Jewishness.
Yes.
So they will want to bring about the situation that no Jew in the world remains, not necessarily by physical means, but Jews will face the demand of complete assimilation, of completely forgetting themselves. Yeah. And how will, I will tell you, I'll give you an example, how will it happen in practice? There will be demand to remove Magen Davids. Why? Because Magen David is associated with this terrible state of Israel, which we happily destroyed. And therefore, you are a really bad person if you want to stick to Magen David. Please, okay, do remain Jew, but without Magen David. And more and more, and please, no more synagogues, and so on. The existence of Jews who want to remain Jews in the diaspora will become unbearable. And the only way for individual Jews to survive this would be just stop being Jewish. That's the reality that we are going towards, and that's why Israel is also important. Of course, it's important for us because we live here.
But for diaspora
but
Jews.
For everyone who wants to keep in himself some remnant of Jewishness, to be proud of having this identity and being part of this people.
I want to ask you how Jews should combat this. So one of the things that's interesting to me is there's a debate among American Jews. I don't know if you've seen this. During the Super Bowl, there was an advertisement by billionaire Robert Kraft's organization. The Super Bowl is watched by a crazy amount of people. Each ad there costs like $3 million for 30 seconds. So a lot of people put eyes, and a lot of people put, I guess, thought into the message of the ad. And the ad, you see a Jewish, I guess, teenager in school being bullied by older people because he's Jewish. And he's like very, very small and looks helpless. And he's walking and everyone's like hitting him and cursing him. And finally he gets to the end of the hall, I guess, to his locker. And this big a black guy that name is like a Muslim name. I forgot. It says like, we're together in this and I'm going to protect you or something. And then it says like, there's no place for hate and anti-Semitism is bad and everything. And a lot of the Jewish community came out really against it. And the point saying that the way to combat the hatred we see is not by portraying a weak, helpless, sort of Nebuch Jew, not by portraying someone who is the stereotype of the Jew, but the opposite, to portray strength, to portray like you're coming at us, and then showing this boy beating up all the people, or showing that he's strong and it's not affecting him, showing that he's actually a strong member of society. And so those are the two, I guess, ways to combat it. Number one is to fight hate and say, stop hating us and hate is bad, and trying to lobby the Trump administration that happens to be pro a lot of these Jewish organizations right now. It could change in the next election, right? So, or to be strong and fight and show strength. How do you even see those two dichotomies, or how should we fight that? For not us, because we're not there, but American Jews.
Both are wrong.
So how do you do it?
But in both cases, it's part of Jewish neurosis. Jews are just normal people like everyone else, and they have the same rights. And they're not weaker than others, like individuals. They're not stronger than others as individuals. And the message that should be transmitted is that Jews have the same rights as others. But where can they realize their rights at fullest? Only in Israel. Only in free and flourishing Jewish culture that exists in a state of Israel. And therefore, the fate of Jews who want to remain Jews and of Israel is linked, and it's nothing can separate it. And therefore, the fight should not be against kind of imagined forms of anti-Semitism, but against the real form of anti-Semitism. But again, we shouldn't exaggerate our power, our possibility to kind of to fight anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism is a global phenomenon that has nothing to do with Jews. It has to do with the world. In a sense, of course, it's hatred of Jews, but not we are those who are responsible for anti-Semitism. And we are not those who are capable of defeating it because we're just small people like Armenians and Estonians, Norwegians. We just want to live our lives quietly. And therefore, the way to moderate the wave is just to defeat the forces who are against the West, to defeat Russia and Ukraine, to defeat Iran. And actually, these forces actually promote anti-Semitism. Yes. Of course, Qatar, which I think is a client of both.
Right.
Qatar is so small that it can't be so influential without backing from various powers. But so that's it's not our task to defeat anti-Semitism because we are small. What our task is to survive decently. If the situation goes really wrong, to be kind of submarine, like Captain Nemo submarine. And the only place when you can have a relatively safe submarine is here. Therefore, mass aliyah is the only answer.
But wait, if someone's watching us now and they say to themselves, Professor Podoksik is saying all these things. They sound interesting, and they sound about right. But look, the American government, the administration, is filled with Jews in the top
anti-Semites.
Yeah, but I'm saying like the Jews, the American business community is filled with rich Jews that control large swaths of the American economy. Hollywood is not all, but a lot of Jews are top positions in the top big studios. Larry Ellison, Jewish billionaire, is now going to buy the American version of TikTok that's being separated from the Chinese. Jews are in all of the strong positions in America. So with all of the anti-Semitism and anti-Israel hate we've seen over the past 2-3 years, how don't you think you are overreaching in your alarmism? Don't you think that the Jews still, at least in America, have strong positions where they can fight this on their home turf where they are now? They have the money, they have the political power, the top Democrat in the Senate, although I don't really like him, but he's Jewish, Chuck Schumer. A lot of the top people in the House are very prominent Jews. So how aren't you exaggerating?
Jews tend to overestimate the degree of their power. Yeah, because it usually comes from the condition of weakness. Yeah. So, of course, when anti-Semitism is local and in the fringe, that's enough to combat it. Mm-hmm. When anti-Semitism becomes a global phenomenon and the kind of a call for mobilization around all anti-liberal forces in the world, Jews have not so many resources by themselves to fight it. And the only Jews who would be allowed, if this continues, are the Jews who will betray their Jewishness to 100%, not 99%, but to 100%. They will have to stop being
Jewish voices for peace.
Are you prepared for this kind of humiliation? I don't think that's kind of decent human choice to remain in such conditions and forget your Jewishness.
So you think it's realistic that in the next, how many, decade or so, we'll see gradual, in the West, more and more oppression towards Jews on the more institutional level? Because what we've seen
depends on how Israel strong is. If Israel remains strong, successful, there will be a bit less anti-Semitism. If Israel is weak or in the end is eliminated, then the anti-Semitism will rocket. In this sense, it depends on our ability to protect us.
This episode is brought to you by Ayn Rand Center Israel. We meet every alternate Friday to study and discuss the philosophy of Ayn Rand, author of The Fountainhead and Atlas Shrugged. The topics range from ethics to politics, reason versus faith, aesthetics, psychology, and much, much more. This is the only place in Israel where Ayn Rand's unique philosophy is accessible to you, and you're welcome to come learn all about it. It's a great opportunity to learn and meet really interesting people. Attendance is free, and first-timers get a free book. We meet every alternate Friday at the WeWork in Sarona Market, and we like to keep the intellectual discussion going afterwards with some great food and drinks. Click the link for more info on Ayn Rand Center Israel.
So you think that the more Israel is successful and perceived as strong in the region and in the world, the less people, for example, in America, where most Jews are outside of Israel, will hate the Jews? Or at least not hate the Jews, but work to...
The stronger Israel is, the less hatred of Jews there will be.
And that is because why?
Because predators smells blood. For example, now Israel is perceived as weak. Why is it perceived as weak? Because it didn't manage to eliminate Hamas and conquer Gaza. So it didn't succeed in the war, and therefore they have this hope that Israel can be eliminated.
So the more, basically what you're saying is, and this is a good example because if you remember, I want to just, an amazing example that I just saw, which demonstrates why you're probably right. There was the attack in Manchester on Yom Kippur that killed 2 people, I think one by the terrorists, another one in the crossfire. And they said the official numbers of the British government is that right after the attack, the terrorist attack, the amount of anti-Jewish hate crimes in the UK was like quadrupled in the weeks after. And is that because people see that you can kill Jews, that you can attack Jews, and it makes them like inspired. This is, wow, we can do it too, basically, right? Like you said.
Absolutely. The surest ways for Arabs to cause the hatred of Jews is to attack Jews. So when Yasser Arafat in year 2000 attacked Israelis after far-reaching concessions that Ehud Barak made, instantly the whole public opinion and papers turned against Israel. That's kind of counterintuitive. Why would you justify the aggressor?
Exactly.
And the wave anti-Semitism after 7th of October, we saw it immediately on Twitter and other social networks that just escalated to the genocidal degree.
Yeah. Lastly, which is interesting, another interesting is, what about our allies? So we see, for example, just an amazing example to me is the ambassador of the U.S. to Israel right now, Mike Huckabee. The man loves Jews. Mm-hmm. He really loves Jews. He likes Jews. It's from his Christian perspective of his denomination. And in America, there are a lot of people that love Jews, that want Israel to succeed, and that are watching our show, by the way. So what do you say to them? Like, in the sense that, what should they do? They're not going to make Aliyah. They're not Jewish. They want Israel to succeed, and they want Jews to feel at home also in America. What can they do to, I guess, what can they do?
I think it's quite clear. They don't need our advice. They know it certainly.
Yes, but
they need to defeat the evil in the world, to defeat Russia and Ukraine. Not some kind of ceasefire, but to defeat it, to defeat Iran and to contain China. That's their part of the job. Our part on this front of this world war is to defend us and to defeat Arab imperialism.
So, that's on the foreign policy. But internally, if I'm not a diplomat, I'm just a regular Christian that lives in the U.S. somewhere, and I want to, how do I discern, for example, if my congressman, we're coming up to the midterms in America, everyone's going to go to vote if they're watching us. They are politically involved. So they're the type of people that are going to go to vote. And how do they discern if the congressman is anti-Semitic, is just a little bit, like you said, constructive criticism for Israel? How do they understand the situation? How do they read the political leaders?
During the wartime, there can be kind of constructive criticism? What would that mean? Constructive criticism of Churchill. What would that mean? Constructive criticism of Zelensky. There is no such thing.
So if someone...
it's illegitimate to be neutral in this war.
Right. So what you're saying is that if someone says, look, if your politician says to you, I'm against Hamas, obviously, but I don't like that Israel is killing all these people in Gaza. That's someone that you should be like...
Well, first of all, you shouldn't allow your politicians lie. If he says that Israel kills too many people in Gaza, he is lying.
Or he doesn't know what he's talking about.
Well, it's the same for the politician. He should have checked.
Yes, exactly. So that kind of language you're saying is a language that, number one, is obviously lying, but also you should be very wary that if someone talks like that, it can lead to talking even more extreme. It's not like it stops there. That's what I'm saying.
Even if it doesn't lead to talking more extreme, would we not think that someone who's during the Second World War speaks in these terms about Churchill, wouldn't we doubt that he helps the German war effort? Of course not.
Right.
The one who takes kind of neutral, more moral stance.
Yes.
He helps those who contemplate genocide against Israelis. That's all.
Also, how do you explain the fact that one of the things that Tucker Carlson said not too long ago when he was talking with the neo-Nazi Fuentes, but he said, I think you wrote about this maybe, but he said, you wrote about him, I think, doing the interview, but one of the things that he said in the interview was that the people who he hates the most, I think obviously probably more than Jews and Israelis, were, he said, the Christian Zionists. They're the ones that he hates the most. Anti-Semites, it seems to me, obviously hate the Jews, but they really hate the Christians who support the Jews.
Carlson's task, with which he was endowed with, is to destroy the pro-Western American right.
Right.
He just does his job.
But why does it resonate with people? Because he's obviously talking...
with anti-Semites, it resonates. With people who want to defend the Western civilization, doesn't.
No, but my point is that why would he say he hates Christian Zionists more than anyone else, more than the Jews even? Why does he hate them or say that he hates them more than anyone? Why do they make him so angry? Or the people
Because Putin's task is to destroy the West. That's what he's doing.
Right, so he's trying to basically say that anyone who supports the West, i.e. also Israel, is worse than Israel itself. Because it's like from the inside.
Well, it's not all about Jews and about Israel. It's about the survival of Western civilization. It's just not our topic. But these people do like a job for Putin and for other bad guys. Why should we care about them? He should be in jail.
He has a lot of influence. That's the problem.
He should be in
jail.
jail.
Do you think it's a mistake that they're letting him come to Israel now?
Yes.
Because all he's going to do is propagandize against us. So why let
because
him in?
You don't let foreign agents of hostile powers to come to Israel.
And why do you think it's interesting to get your opinion on this. Why do you think they're letting him in then? Because they're saying that if they don't let him in, he'll propagandize.
Because the Israeli government is not so competent as we would like it to be, right?
That's an understatement.
They make many stupid things, but I don't think by this still count. This person is a very dangerous person. He doesn't serve American interests, and therefore there is no place for him also in Israel.
Right. And I'm just peppering you with interesting questions before we finish. One other thing that's a debate within Israel society, I guess foreign policy people, is how much we should be accepting of people who want to be allies of us on the more extreme right in Europe, let's say. Because there you have a dynamic where, so for example, parties that have a history of Jew hatred are now, because different reasons, I guess the most reason is the immigration issue where they really hate the Muslims and they feel like we are the ally against, like the enemy of our enemy is my friend.
I don't know what it means to accept. We should be happy that
inviting
for anyone
them here.
who offers us our support, either on the extreme left or on the extreme right. And we can be sure that not that someone who supports Israel, he will never be really extreme right and will never be really extreme left. Actually, on the extreme left of Germany, there is a movement called anti-Deutsch, which is also very pro-Israel. But what we now clearly see in Western politics is that the truly fascist forces on the right, they become anti-Semitic. For example, the Reform Party turned out to be quite a decent and Protestant party in Britain. Therefore, the anti-Semites and fascists now established another party in the UK, which is more extreme than the Reform Party.
Yes, and my friend is now in the head of Reform Friends of Israel.
Basically, the lack of Jews is, even if Jews want to be communist or fascist, others will never let them be fascists and communists. They're always driven to be decent people in the center. And that's our luck.
Does that make you sad, or like when you understanding this? I think a lot of Jews don't even understand it, which is why they're always looking for like acceptance for other people. But once you accept that, this realization that you're always going to be, I guess, different or looked upon in a different way, in double standard, like we spoke about before, is that a good like? There's a way to look at it in a good way. Like, we're always going to be different, special.
No, I think we should think about ourselves, first of all, as human beings, living at a certain and a common moral rules, and respect ourselves because of this. There are many communists in the world. There are many fascists in the world. We thought we eliminated all these hydras after the Second World War and after the fall of communism. And here they come back. So what we need to do is to despise them.
Yes.
Not because we're the best people, but because we're normal people.
Right. And hopefully more normal people will see and that aren't Jews. And also, I have to say that one of the things that seems to me to be 100% true is that when the hatred of the Jews goes way up, it's also showing that, like, you're not confident in your own self. Like you said, you're looking for the scapegoat, right? Does that make sense? Like, if you a society really hates Jews, you can usually say that they're also not that successful.
I think we invest too much effort into understanding the psychology of anti-Semitism. We should dissect it for our own purposes, but kind of empathy. We shouldn't really display too much empathy.
No, I have zero empathy.
The correct attitude is contempt. Let's forget about anti-Semites. Realize they're dangerous and do our own thing to lead a decent life of the decent society as Israel is, and the Jewish people
which is why it's important for me and you and other people here in Israel to fight to make Israel a liberal democracy work. I think
it's working. It's not working perfectly, but again, it's a kind of peripheral liberal democratic country. What does it mean, peripheral? Like Greece, like Moldova, like Georgia. So we're perhaps not the most liberal democratic country, but we're decent enough, and that's enough. We don't need to be best. We just not need to be normal.
Yes, it's very hard being normal. But yeah, I agree. Professor Efraim Podoksik, but full name in there. It's really interesting to talk to you, number one. For those, I assume there will be a lot of disagreement with a lot of different aspects of what you said among our viewers and listeners. So please leave comments and I will transfer them to you. And if there's anything that you would like to respond to, we will get, but please be as, I would say, respectful as possible, because I won't answer people who are cursing and obviously stuff like that.
But harsh comments are okay.
Yeah, that's okay.
Disagreements are fine, and I will be very happy to continue this discussion.
And I assume that Jews in America will be annoyed. And look, I have my non-Jewish friends; they're really supportive of us. But we will dissect that in the comments. But just letting you go, it was a very interesting and I think important discussion. We're going to have a few other people that will be speaking about the same topic later, so we'll get a lot of different perspectives on it. And thank you for being the first one to talk about this important topic on our show.
Thank you for inviting me. It was a pleasure.